All right, so this time we're going deep on something pretty huge. We're looking at the beginning of Donald Trump's second term as U.S. president.
Wow.
And to make things even more interesting, the sources we're using are Al-Sharq, Al-Awsat, CNN Arabic, and Al Arabia.
So a real international perspective then.
Absolutely. It'll be fascinating to see how these articles from outside the U.S. are looking at Trump's return to office.
Okay.
So what are your initial thoughts? Anything that jumped out at you right away?
Well, the first thing that struck me was just how different these sources are from what you typically see in U.S. media. It's a whole other side of the story.
Yeah, like a different conversation happening at the same time. But let's get into the specifics. The first article is from Al-Sharq, Al-Awsat. And there's something I definitely didn't expect to see.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it highlights Amazon's plan to donate $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund.
Hmm.
And not only that, they're also going to stream the entire event on Prime Video. Now, on the surface, it seems like a pretty straightforward news item, but I think there's more to it than meets the eye. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when you consider the history between Trump and Amazon, especially Jeff Bezos, it's definitely worth a closer look. It wasn't that long ago that Trump was publicly criticizing Amazon and Bezos' ownership of the Washington Post.
Right. He was claiming it gave Bezos too much control over the media. I definitely remember those very public jabs.
Yeah, and now suddenly we have this big donation and they're streaming the inauguration. It seems like a pretty sudden shift.
What do you think is behind it? Is Amazon actually trying to smooth things over with Trump?
Well, it's hard to know for sure, but I think it's probably more strategic than that.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, think about it. Tech companies like Amazon, they're always trying to build relationships with whoever is in power.
Makes sense.
And this donation, along with streaming the inauguration, it could be a way for Amazon to signal they're ready to cooperate with the Trump administration.
So they're trying to improve their position, maybe get some favorable policies down the line.
Exactly. It could be a very calculated move.
Yeah, and we have to remember, Amazon isn't just an online store anymore. They're involved in so many things. Cloud computing, logistics, even space exploration. And those are all areas where government policies and regulations have a huge impact.
You're right. $1 million donation could be a pretty small price to pay if it means influencing policy in those areas.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's not just Amazon either. Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, they also donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration.
So maybe it's a larger trend within the tech industry, companies realizing they need to adjust to a second Trump term.
Instead of fighting him, they're trying to work with him. It definitely makes you curious about what's at stake for these companies.
Oh, definitely. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But for now, let's move on and look at the broader international reaction to Trump's second term. The Al-Sharq Al-Awsat article, it mentions something else that I found interesting. Well, they talk about how significant it is that Amazon is streaming the inauguration on Prime Video.
Yeah, that detail stood out to me as well. Why do you think an Arabic news source would focus on that?
It could suggest that there's a lot of interest, maybe even some anticipation in the Arab world about how Trump will handle the Middle East in his second term.
Right. His first term was a pretty big shakeup for that region. Things like the Abraham Accords and pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, those decisions had major consequences.
Absolutely. And I think that's why they're paying such close attention to what he does next.
So it's more than just a tech company streaming an event. It's a window into how different parts of the world are looking at the U.S. And speaking of global perspectives, CNN Arabic's coverage of the inauguration has something else I didn't see coming.
Really? What's that?
Trump invited Xi Jinping, the president of China, to attend his inauguration.
Wow.
It's pretty remarkable considering all the tension there was between the U.S. and China during Trump's first term. Remember the threats of tariffs on Chinese goods and his hardline stance on trade?
Yeah, that was a major part of his America First agenda. To my knowledge, neither a Chinese or Russian president has ever been to a U.S. inauguration, so this is uncharted territory.
You're absolutely right. It's a bold move. What do you think Trump is trying to achieve by inviting Xi? Is it a sign of a potential reset in their relationship, or is it more about asserting his power on the world stage?
It's tough to say for sure, but it definitely highlights how complex the relationship is between these two global superpowers. Trump's invitation, it could be an attempt to rebuild bridges, but it could also be a way to set the terms for future engagement, on his terms.
And it's not just Xi Jinping either. He's also invited Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia.
It seems like Trump's making a very clear statement about how he plans to approach global politics in his second term. He's ready to engage with leaders he's had disagreements with in the past.
But the question is, what will those engagements look like? What are his goals?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one we'll be exploring further in this deep dive. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, he's definitely not afraid to shake things up on the world stage. And that reminds me, we have another source that gives us some more perspective on his approach to the Middle East. It's from Al Arabia.
Oh, yeah, that one was really fascinating.
Yeah, they talk about how there are a lot of mixed feelings about Trump's return, especially when it comes to his policies in the Middle East.
Yeah, his first term definitely left a mark on that region. He really broke from traditional U.S. policy, and it's hard to say whether it was for better or worse.
Yeah, you could definitely call it a mixed bag. Remember his decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem?
Oh, yeah, that was a huge deal.
It really was, and Al Arabia points out how that move was praised by Israel, but it also caused a lot of anger among Palestinians, and a lot of people in the international community saw it as a blow to the peace process.
Right, it definitely created tension. Even with some of the U.S.'s allies in the region, they saw it as an unnecessary provocation.
And then there was the Iran nuclear deal. He pulled the U.S. out of that and put sanctions back on Iran.
Another controversial move. Al Arabia says that decision is being viewed with both hope and skepticism in the Arab world.
Really?
Yeah. Some leaders see it as a necessary step to counter Iran's influence, but others are worried it could destabilize the region and lead to more conflict.
It sounds like a lot of people are unsure about what to expect from Trump in the Middle East. It's almost like he's rolling the dice with these policies.
It's a good analogy. Big moves, unpredictable outcomes. And it's not just the Middle East we have to think about. We need to consider his domestic agenda as well.
Yeah, that's going to have a huge impact on everything. Luckily, we have a great source for that. CNN Arabic's summary of Trump's interview with Time magazine.
Oh, yeah, that's where he really lays out his vision for a second term. Lots of talk about making America great again. I think that's going to be his new slogan.
There's a nice ring to it.
Doesn't it? But beyond the catchphrases, what are the actual policies he's emphasizing?
Well, it seems like he's doubling down on a lot of the ideas from his first term. Things like economic nationalism, strengthening the military, taking a tough stance on immigration.
Right. He's promising to bring back manufacturing jobs to the U.S., make the country less reliant on foreign goods, and build up the armed forces.
As more America first.
To a large extent, yes. But there are some new things, or at least shifts in emphasis.
Like what?
Well, one that stands out is his focus on what he calls restoring American values.
That sounds interesting. What does he mean by that?
It seems to be more of a cultural push than anything specific. He's talking about things like traditional family structures, patriotism, going back to what he sees as core American principles.
Ah, I see.
It's definitely a message that resonates with his base.
But how do you think it will play out internationally? I mean, focusing so much on American values, could that create tension with allies who have different values and priorities?
It's definitely a possibility. It could be seen as a rejection of multiculturalism and globalism.
And what about his economic policies? During his first term, his protectionist stance led to trade wars with other countries. Do you think we'll see more of that?
It's possible. He seems pretty committed to his America First economic approach, which means prioritizing American industries and workers, even if it causes disruption to global trade.
So basically, we could be in for a pretty bumpy ride over the next 4 years, both domestically and internationally.
Yeah, it's shaping up that way. But remember, it's not just Trump calling the shots. There's Congress, the courts, public opinion, and then there are always global events that nobody can predict.
Right. So many factors could influence how his second term plays out.
Exactly. It's like a giant puzzle with a bunch of moving pieces. That's what makes it so fascinating.
And one of those pieces are the tech giants we talked about earlier. What do you think they make of all this?
Well, considering how much their businesses rely on regulations, global trade, things like that, I imagine they're watching everything very carefully.
Trying to predict how Trump's policies will affect them.
Exactly. And they're probably looking for ways to influence those policies to their advantage. It's a high-stakes game, that's for sure.
And they have to play it carefully?
Definitely. They need to protect their interests, but they also don't want to alienate their users or compromise their own values.
It's a delicate balancing act.
For sure, and it's not just the tech giants who are feeling this uncertainty.
You're right, I'm sensing a theme here. All the articles we've looked at, they all seem to point to this feeling of uncertainty about the future.
Yeah, it's like we're at a crossroads, and the decisions made in the next 4 years are going to have big consequences. Whether it's about global power, the Middle East, the U.S. economy, there's a lot on the line.
And it's kind of unsettling, isn't it? This lack of predictability.
Yeah, it definitely goes against what we're used to. But maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's a chance for us to reflect and really think about where we're headed.
Instead of just going with the flow.
Exactly. We should be asking ourselves some tough questions.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, given what we know about Trump's agenda and the potential impact of his policies, what can we do to prepare for the changes that might be coming? How can we make sure our voices are heard?
Those are good questions.
And how can we help create a future that aligns with our values?
That's a big one. It's easy to feel powerless when we see all these huge events happening around us.
You're right, but we're not powerless. We can choose to stay informed, to get involved, to fight for what we believe in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And that brings me to a final thought for you.
Okay, go ahead.
All of these articles we've discussed, they've given us a really valuable snapshot of how the world is reacting to Trump's second term.
They have.
They've shown us the uncertainties, the challenges we might face, and the opportunities that could arise.
Yeah, and how important it is to think critically about all of this.
Exactly. It's not just about reading the news, it's about understanding the complexities, the different viewpoints.
Yeah.
We need to develop the skills to navigate this increasingly complicated world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's easy to get lost in all the headlines and the 24/7 news cycle, but it's so important to take a step back and consider different perspectives, form our own opinions.
Absolutely. And that's what this deep dive has been all about.
Couldn't agree more. It's amazing to think about how much power these tech giants really have.
Oh, yeah.
But they're still playing by the rules of the game.
Right, they have to. Too much pushback against the government, and they could end up with regulations they don't like, or even antitrust lawsuits.
Exactly. But on the other hand, if they get too cozy with the administration, they could lose the trust of their users.
Not to mention compromise their own principles.
Yeah, they're definitely walking a tightrope. And, it's not just the tech companies that are feeling this tension, this feeling of uncertainty. It seems to be a common thread running through all of these articles we've been discussing.
Now that you mention it, yeah, I think you're right. It's like we're standing at the edge of something big.
A turning point.
Yeah, and the choices made over the next 4 years, well, they could have consequences that last for generations.
Whether it's about the global balance of power, the situation in the Middle East, the direction of the American economy, there's a lot at stake.
So much uncertainty, it can be a bit unnerving.
Definitely. I think we as humans, we crave some sense of predictability.
Yeah.
But it seems like that's gone out the window.
Yeah, things are changing fast in ways we might not have anticipated. But, maybe this is a chance for us to step back and really examine where we are and where we're going.
Instead of just letting events sweep us along.
Exactly. This is a time for asking tough questions for ourselves and for our leaders.
What kind of questions are you thinking of?
Well, we've learned a lot about Trump's agenda and what he wants to accomplish in his second term.
Yeah, big plans.
So the question is, knowing what we know, what can we do to prepare for the potential changes? How can we make sure our voices are heard in all of this? And how can we contribute to building a future that reflects our values?
Those are important questions. I think it's easy to get overwhelmed when you see these huge events unfolding on the world stage.
Right. It can feel like we're just tiny cogs in a giant machine. But we're not powerless. We have choices to make.
We can stay informed, we can get involved, we can stand up for what we believe in.
You got it. And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with.
Okay, I'm listening.
These articles we've explored today, they've given us such a valuable glimpse into how the world is responding to Trump's return to power.
They really have.
We've seen the uncertainty, the potential pitfalls, and the opportunities that might emerge.
And the need for clear thinking and careful analysis.
More than ever, we need to go beyond just reading the headlines. We need to develop the skills to understand the complexities, the nuances, the different perspectives at play.
It's like we've been saying, it's about learning to navigate a world that's becoming more and more complex.
And that's really what this whole deep dive has been about.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring these sources, to dig deeper into the topics that resonate with you, and to have those tough conversations with the people around you.
Right. This is just the start of a much bigger discussion. And your voice matters. Keep questioning. Keep challenging assumptions. Keep striving to understand.
We hope this deep dive has provided some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to take action.
Remember, knowledge is power. The future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make, both as individuals and as a society.
So stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.